franktalks.com.
This program does not represent the views of this station and may be considered offensive to some listeners. This program may contain mature subject matter, including frank discussions of controversial topics. It is intended for mature, open-minded audiences. Discretion is highly advised. This program is entirely independently produced by and is copyrighted by Frank. It is broadcast here under license.
You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles, and I'm Frank because I have to be. In studio today we have Mr. David J. David J. has come into studio to talk about asexuality. Welcome to studio, David.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's start off with our first question. Where you were born, and how were you raised? What were you educated in?
I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, the child of two architects. I grew up in the city in the Midwest, really loving it, skating a lot, going out and canoeing down different rivers.
And can you tell me anything about your upbringing?
Let's see, what specifically do you want to know? I grew up in the city. My parents were both very open-minded and liberal, which is something that has been a great help in my life. They're wonderful people. I have a huge respect for them and a great relationship I have with them. I have two younger siblings, a sister and a brother. And always went to very good schools.
All right, now let's talk about how early were you when you became aware of your asexuality?
I was about 13 or 14. It was around the time when all of my friends began to become aware of their sexuality. And so it's all my friends started talking about being attracted to people and having crushes on people and kind of started exploring their sexuality. I had no frame of reference to understand what they were going through. And that was kind of the first moment of realization where I said, oh, something's going on here that's with me that I need to figure out.
Now, was there anybody that you were able to tell about this difference? Anybody you were able to talk to?
At first, I started talking to some close friends of mine. I started talking to some close friends of mine who were lesbians because they'd had an experience kind of figuring out their own sexuality, and so that made me more comfortable. And then I started processing more and more with just really close friends that I had.
And was this still around the age of 13, 14?
This was all through high school.
Okay.
It was funny because my friends would kind of come to me and they would talk about whatever boy or whatever girl kind of was the latest piece of drama in their life, and then we'd switch over and I would talk about kind of sexuality and what it all meant and me trying to figure out where I fit in this really complicated sexual world. And so it worked out, but that allowed me the space to really kind of come to terms with myself and realize that asexuality wasn't a problem.
Can you share any experiences growing up where your asexuality became an issue?
Yeah, I think that the biggest issue for me was that I just didn't know how to think about it. I didn't know how to talk about it because no one was acknowledging that you could not like sex and be happy. So I had to spend a lot of time sort of asking myself, is this a problem? Is it all right for me to not like sex? Is something bad going to happen to me if I don't? And once I'd kind of come to terms and realized that nothing bad was going to happen to me, then I was left with a lot of questions about how do I connect with people. I had issues when I was younger, and it's still complicated. Thinking about how I'm going to be intimate with people, a lot of my friends sort of said, "Oh, okay, well, if we're sexual, then we're dating, and we're boyfriend and girlfriend, or boyfriend and boyfriend, and that means that we get all these special rights and privileges in terms of our relationship. And if we're not sexual, then we don't, and we're not dating, we're just friends, and we don't get any of those special rights and privileges." And so figuring out how I was going to be able to have relationships that kind of were recognized as having that kind of power was a big issue.
For the benefits of our listeners who maybe have never even heard of the topic of asexuality, Can you define what those powers and benefits in a relationship would be that they may or may not take for granted?
That's complicated. But I would say that it gets down to a lot of it has to do with what kind of access you have to someone's time, and also what kind of expectations you form about where a relationship can go. If someone expects a relationship to be able to kind of put it in a heteronormative, I guess, context, a relationship to be able to turn into a family, then, well, a family being not necessarily, then they'll invest more emotion in that than if they think, oh, this is someone who's going to be able to be my friend, and maybe 20 years from now we'll stay in touch, but we're not going to be, this relationship isn't going to be able to, I'm not going to be able to move in with this person, we're not going to be able to commit to one another forever, we're not going to be able to raise kids, or some sort of equivalent, really close connection.
Would you say that's the worst thing that happened to you in getting involved in relationships, being asexual?
The worst thing? Maybe, though I think of that as a challenge. I don't think of that as a bad thing.
Okay.
Because it's given me something very difficult to deal with. It's also given me, I think, a unique perspective on thinking about my relationships and thinking about intimacy that's been very valuable for me.
I'd like to ask you about the relationships that you have gotten into, if you'd be willing to talk about them, up to now, and let's see if we can focus more about your relationships very early on, as you were finishing high school. Were they romantic in nature? Was there an inability to be romantic?
They were very close and oftentimes very affectionate. I didn't call them romantic. The other people I was involved with didn't call them romantic because we couldn't conceive of the idea that a relationship that didn't involve sex could be a romantic one, or didn't involve sexuality could be a romantic one. So we referred to the relationships as friendships. We said, oh, we're really, really good, we're good friends. And we'd hang out together, and sometimes we'd hang out together and be closer than whoever their boyfriend at the time was, which caused issues as well. But that it was really about kind of having this type of intimacy that didn't fit into the mold, that didn't fit into the idea that you have a hierarchy with sexual romantic relationships on top and friendships underneath it.
When you say it was very affectionate and very intimate, can you provide some examples as to what kind of affection an asexual person would be open to that's not sexual?
Well, for me personally, affection is about communicating how you feel about someone to them, any way that you do that. So it can be verbal, it can be through activities, it can be through joking around and poking fun at someone if in your relationship you've established that that's how you show that you care about them. It can also be about touch, and I personally, in relationships, I can be a very physical person. I really like that. So I like hugging people and cuddling with people, and also dancing with people. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Trying to get more into your personal background here. And again, if there's anything I ask you that you don't feel comfortable with asking, you just let me know that you'd rather move on.
Okay.
What have you tried in experimentation to learn about yourself and in that, is there anything that you regret trying?
What have I tried in experimentation? Well, that's a pretty long list. I consider myself a very exploratory person. Are you referring to what I've tried as far as sexuality in experimentation, or do you want me to go through all the places I've visited and the recipes?
I'm looking more about your sexuality.
Okay.
I'm just thinking here that for myself, I have a hard time personally to grasp the concept of a person who is asexual, of not feeling sexual desires per se. So I'm trying to figure out what I would have done in that case, and you know what? I don't have the faintest clue. So I can only imagine what someone growing up feeling asexual, what they might have tried in order to fit in, and that's where I want to go with that.
Oh, okay. I've never really tried sexuality in order to fit in. I knew pretty strongly. I knew by looking at my friends who, even before they'd done anything sexual, very much knew that they wanted to. And I knew from that they had a desire and a type of desire that I didn't. So I've never felt like if I tried sexuality, I would somehow realize that I liked it. Because when I have experimented with it, which was later on, it was when I was in college, to the extent that I did experiment with it, it became sort of, the more it was like the things that I knew I liked doing, touching people, being affectionate with people, hugging people and cuddling, the more I liked it, and the more it sort of became what's traditionally thought of as sexuality. I wasn't averse to it. Some asexual people are. Some asexual people are averse to sexuality. I was just indifferent. I guess the overwhelming feeling would be awkwardness, because here I was kind of acting out this role that I didn't feel I had any reason to act out, in a context where whoever I was acting it out with was considering it really important for some reason, or considering it more important than it made sense for me to consider it. And so what I've experimented with making out with people, and with, I guess you would call it a level of petting. But it was interesting. I think it allowed me to learn more about myself, but it didn't really complicate my own image of myself.
Okay.
It's I know that it could be difficult to describe, but it's the way that some people don't like particular types of food, or some people don't like doing particular types of dance because they can't get into them. It's just an activity that doesn't make sense to me on any level to use as a way to act out the things that it's acting out.
I got another question for you. Because of your particular perspective and your asexuality, would you see our society as a sex-focused society? And if you do, what's your opinion of that?
I would see our society as a sex-focused society. I think a lot of that is positive. I think it's better to talk about sexuality than not to talk about it, because it's a really important part of a lot of people's lives. And I think that openly talking about sexuality is something that benefits asexual people as well. That being said, I think that many people rely on sexuality as the only way to do a lot of things that it's not the only way to do. I think that our society reinforces the idea that if you want to understand and experience pleasure in your life, sexuality is a vital part of that. If you want to explore and understand intimacy, sexuality is a vital part of that. If you want to achieve adulthood, sexuality is a vital part of that. And I don't think any of those things are true. I think sexuality can be a great way to do all of those things, and it should be talked about as a way to do all of those things, but we should also be acknowledging and talking about the other ways that you can express intimacy and play around with power and explore pleasure as being just as valid.
And how do you think we should go about improving that? What are some of the methods that could be used?
It's been interesting because in the asexual community, that's exactly what we've been doing. A lot of the focus of what asexual people are getting together to talk about, to me it seems, has been exploring those kind of issues of how do you do all this stuff that sex does without sex. And To me, it's a question of kind of breaking down why sex is so important. Not necessarily saying that it's bad that it's important, but when I look at sexuality, I never just see sexuality. It's about power and negotiating power and playing around with power, and power isn't a bad thing in relationships, I don't think. It's about people's desire for intimacy and people's desire for a release from whatever it is they want to be released from the rest of their lives. And whenever I see a situation that would turn a sexual person on, it's got some component of those things in there. And so in many ways it's about, I guess, the reverse of what everyone accuses Freud of doing. Everyone accuses Freud of taking a cigar and calling it sexual. Taking anything and calling it sexual. It's taking anything sexual and looking at the non-sexual components of that.
My next question for you. Mm-hmm. Being asexual, do you ever have a desire to have children? Or, have you thought about having your own children? What are your thoughts and feelings about that?
I definitely want to have kids. And I don't see any reason why that would be an issue. I think there's a lot of ways that you can have kids without having sex. And I don't know what kind of family I want to build. I don't know if I'm going to wind up in a relationship with one person. If I'm going to find a couple, maybe a sexual couple, who I form a really, really close relationship with and kind of move in with them and form a family with them. There's asexual people who've done that. If I'm going to just find a really, really close community that can help support me in raising my kid and live in that kind of a scenario, I'm open to exploring different ways that I could form a family, but I know I want kids to be a part of my life.
And given that you grew up asexual, and I'm sure this somehow fit into the dynamic with your parents, mm-hmm. What advice, if any, would you like to offer to people growing up with asexuality, whether you want to give advice to the children who are asexual or the parents who have to raise an asexual child?
First of all, I would say what we always say on asexuality.org, which is the word asexual isn't a label that you can get tested for. It's a tool. It's a word that you use to figure yourself out and communicate yourself to people. And if you think that word is useful, then use it. And if you don't think that word is useful, then don't. And if you think that word is useful for 3 years and then you realize it's not anymore, that's fine too.
All right. We got to go to break. You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles, and we'll be back right after this.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by the Adult Male Virgin Seminar and Telephone Consultations. Guys, if the only breast you ever touched was in a bucket of chicken, you need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. If the only thing you've licked recently has been your fingers to turn the pages of a book, you need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. If the only female body part you are familiar with wears a cape, can fly, or has superpowers, you need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. If you think the G-Spot is the name of a new club, you need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. If the words missionary conjures up images of guys in long robes, you need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. If the only sensation your fingers have had are pressing the buttons on your remote control, then you need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. Do you know what it means when a woman asks you up to her place for coffee? If you think that she is thirsty for caffeine, then you definitely need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. Only available at franktalks.com. Frank helps adult boys become men.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by Everything Out of Her Mouth is a Test, a man's guide to the emotional needs of women. What would your life be like if you knew exactly what to say and do with women? This book is for the guy that simply wants to learn how to handle women's tests by addressing her emotional needs. By this, you create the type of attraction that will make her see you as the one she was destined to be with. This book will teach you how to get the woman you want and how to keep her. Everything out of her mouth is a test is the Rosetta Stone for men to understand exactly what a woman means when she speaks and how to respond. Is that worth changing your life forever? Buy this book at franktalks.com now.
Frank Talks, Pleasures and Lifestyles mission statement. Our mandate is to make the world a better place by sharing information and interviewing people who actively experience and live various different pleasures and lifestyles in order to inspire and educate listeners about the possibilities to lead more interesting and fulfilling lives.
You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles, and I'm Frank because I have to be. In studio today we have Mr. David J., who's come in to talk about asexuality. Welcome back to studio, David.
Thanks.
All right, let's ask the one question that by now everybody is dying to know, dying to hear. What is asexuality?
An asexual person is someone who does not experience sexual attraction. So the way that most people, either if they're walking down the street and they see someone, or if they're in a relationship with someone, at some point feel compelled to include sexuality in the way that they relate with people. Asexual people don't feel that compulsion.
Now, is this something that's hereditary? Will asexual parents normally give birth to asexual children?
We really don't know. The level of scientific research on asexuality is really minimal right now. It's just beginning. This community has kind of just appeared over the past 2 or 3 years, and research on the topic of asexuality has started around that time. And so there's a very preliminary estimate right now that about 1% of the population might be asexual. But for any hard scientific data about asexuality, the only answer is more research has to be done. And we at asexuality.org, are really encouraging that and trying to help scientists to get as much good, open research done as possible.
Can an asexual feel romantic feelings at all?
Yes. And asexual people feel all the same emotions as sexual people do. And we have the same kind of range of emotional intensity. It's more complicated for asexual people to label what a romantic relationship is. And there's a lot of discussion in the community about how to think about our relationships, because it's not as simple to break them down to romantic relationships in one category. You know, romantic relationships that involve sexuality and friendships that don't involve sexuality. But many asexual people use the word romantic and say that they're in love with someone and talk about experiencing romantic feelings. And there are asexual people in the community who are getting married, who are finding other ways that they can commit to people long term.
That brings me to my next question. Does asexuality mean a lack of feeling love?
No. Sex and love are different things, bottom line. And in many cases, I think we're forced to think about love differently because in our society, sex and sexuality and love are kind of very integrated concepts, but we still experience it. We still experience it just as much and just as strongly as anyone else.
What pleasures can an asexual person experience?
Well, I don't think you really want me to start listing. I could go on forever.
Okay, can you tell me then what pleasures then an asexual person cannot experience?
Cannot experience. I think that we're not interested in sex. So, to me, anything genital pleasure with a partner is not something that I've ever experienced as pleasurable. Some asexual people masturbate, and many don't. Some experience arousal, and many don't. But the important thing to understand is that it's not that we have less pleasure in our life. It's that the places that we get that pleasure are different. for every sex is something that takes a lot of time and energy for sexual people to do. And that's time and energy that we're spending on experiencing pleasure other ways. And maybe the type of pleasure that we wind up experiencing isn't as intense as sexuality, but a lot of times it is. If I'm fighting really intensely for something that I believe in, that's a kind of pleasure that's really powerful for me. Or if I'm exploring a level of connecting with someone that otherwise wouldn't be able to, that's a kind of pleasure that's really intense for me. Or if I'm, making a lot of chocolate. So there are, so there's the I guess short answer is that any type of pleasure you can imagine, almost. There's a lot of ways to have fun out there.
I really like the chocolate example.
Thanks.
Getting back to what you had mentioned, genital petting, feeling of arousal, some people do, some people don't. I get the understanding here, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's, for an asexual person, that type of sexual touching or sexual activity, is it really a take it or leave it sort of thing, or do they just would rather not do it at all?
I'll speak for myself personally, and I get the sense that this is where a lot of asexual people are. I personally feel indifferent towards it. But in any context where that kind of sexuality happens, it's charged with some sort of meaning. And that level of meaning makes it awkward and makes it into a negative experience. So because I know that sexuality is this important thing in the world, and because I know that if there's something I'm engaging in with a partner, there's some reason that my partner feels compelled to do it. And that reason is probably intricately intertwined with whatever relationship I have with them. And all of those things make it so it can't just be a neutral experience.
Okay.
I guess would be the answer.
Is it possible, and this is coming from my own very naive understanding of it, is it possible for an asexual man to maintain an erection because he's not sexually, he doesn't feel the desire for sex? Is it possible for an asexual woman during sex to feel wet?
If they have sex with someone. I don't know from personal experience. I've never had sex, but I know there are sexual people who have, and male and female. And yes, I think it's possible, but I think it's a stretch to associate the physical symptoms associated with sexual arousal with the emotive type of sexual desire that a lot of sexual people feel. So I am an asexual person who can experience sexual arousal. And the physiological things that happen to my body when I experience sexual arousal aren't linked to the kind of desire to engage in sexual activity that I'm told they're linked to in sexual people.
Okay.
It's a different. I mean, it's more like I'm observing something happening to my body, and kind of, it's generally not something that I care that much about.
Okay.
But it doesn't have a big impact on what I want to do with my day.
I have a question here about categorizing homosexuality and heterosexuality. Now, if an asexual feels no sexual desire, no sexual feelings in that respect, can there be a distinction between hetero or homo? Or can an asexual develop a loving relationship with each? Is it possible to be asexual and still have a preference for either one gender or the other?
Yes. Many asexual people identify as asexual and gay, asexual and bi, asexual and lesbian or straight. And that's the definition of asexuality is an asexual is person is someone who doesn't experience sexual attraction. But many asexual people still experience attraction. So we'll still see someone and feel compelled to be in a relationship with them, just not a sexual relationship. And because of that, there are people who are attracted to men, who are attracted to women, who are attracted to both. And there are people who don't really experience attraction, but who, like me, I'm someone who doesn't who experiences attraction, but pretty weakly. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a desire to form relationships with people. It just means I don't get crushes on people that strongly.
Okay. What is it like for an asexual person to try and meet other asexual people? Is it difficult? Are there signs that you know to look for when you're trying to hook up with someone else who is also asexual?
It's very difficult right now. As I alluded to earlier, the community is very, very young, and it's mostly popped up over the internet. So we have a little over about 7,000 members in the English-speaking community. There are also communities in Russian, German, French, Italian, Portuguese, Japanese, Dutch, that are centered in other countries around the world, and where people talk in those languages. And so if you want to meet another asexual person, a lot of times what you have to do is go onto the community and just try to find people who are in your area and then meet up with them. And we're just beginning to get to the critical mass in areas like Germany and the UK and the US, where people can have those kinds of meetups. And so we're just beginning to have a local community. But it's still starting. So I think it's difficult it's difficult to meet a lot of asexual people in your area right now, just because the community is still so new and so small, and though it's growing very rapidly, and because the idea of asexuality is I think still just getting out there.
Do you remember the first time you met an asexual person, or the first asexual person that you met where you were able to finally share a commonality with?
Oh yes, definitely. It happened actually in stages. I found, after years and years and years of looking and finding nothing, I found an article online on some zine that talked about asexuality, and it was a hugely powerful experience for me to know that there were other people out there who were sharing my experience. And from there, I kind of found my first communities where people were talking about this. And then once I'd started asexuality.org, I started communicating a lot over email, over phone, and over our online forum with people who shared my experience. And it's difficult to describe, but I think that there are a lot of forces out there telling asexual people that we're not okay, that we're somehow broken, that if you want to be happy, if you ever want to connect with anyone, if you ever want to kind of live life in a way that's worthwhile, you have to be sexual. And it's really powerful and really validating to find other people for the first time who can demonstrate that that's not the case.
If two asexual people get into a relationship, is it completely devoid of sex, or at the very least, sexual tensions?
the cases I know of two asexual people who've been in a relationship, that's not to say it's devoid of tension. That's not to say that it's devoid of any of the emotional things that you would associate with a relationship.
But at the end of the day, do they go to bed together, or do they?
Yeah, a lot of times they go to bed together. They won't necessarily have sex in the bed, but people sleep together and be affectionate and cuddle and touch.
And let's talk about the idea of fidelity and jealousy. If your partner is asexual, chances are your partner will never be unfaithful to you. But does that eliminate a lot of the jealousy, you think, in relationships when people feel threatened by another person or a partner?
It makes it more complicated. The whole idea of asexual monogamy is something that's gotten talked about a lot, and there's some asexual couples I know about who refer to themselves as being monogamous, and some who don't, and a lot of relationships between asexual people and sexual people that are just as complicated, if not more so.
Mm-hmm.
You're required, I think, in a situation very similar to the one that polyamorous people are in, you're required to have a more in-depth conversation about exactly what kind of commitment you want to have, about why you're important to one another, and how you could potentially hurt one another, and how you want each other to be there. How you want to be there for one another. And it's not as easy as just saying, okay, I'm not going to have sex with anyone else, you're not going to have sex with anyone else, and therefore we're going to be together and be happy. You have to get more in depth, but I think that conversation can be important and can be powerful in and of itself, even if it's a little harder to have.
We have to go to break again. You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles. We'll be back right after this.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by the book I'm a Man, That's My Job, The Philosophy of a Seducer. Ladies, have you ever wondered where all the real men have gone? Do you turn to your women friends because you cannot find a true man in your life? Do you want the man in your life to step up and know what it means to be a man that can make you feel like the woman that you are? Are you tired of mothering the men you date? Give these boys the gift of manhood. The book, I'm a Man, That's My Job, teaches men to create their own seduction persona, personal inner game, and how to take the lead in a relationship. Buy this book now at franktalks.com.
Would you like to sponsor Frank Talks? Visit www.franktalks.com and contact Frank, because he has to be. Sponsorships are always welcome, whether it's prize giveaways, parting gifts for our guests, studio equipment, accessories for the Frankmobile, or a host of other wonderment. Help Frank Talks make the world a better place, one interview at a time.
From Loser to Seducer is the story of Frank B. Kerman. This book marks the triumph of a nice guy over most of his inner demons. This includes going from being a loser to managing 5 lovers at the same time, his first Valentine's date with 2 women at the same time, and getting back the one that got away. Want to learn how you can change your life? Buy this book at franktalks.com.
You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles, and I'm Frank because I have to be. In studio we have Mr. David J., who's talking to us today about asexuality. Welcome back to studio, David.
It's a great interview. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, I'm having a great time with this. Very educational. Let's go right into it. In our last segment, we were talking about, you had alluded to some relationship structures, and I'd like to talk about being asexual and getting into monogamous relationships, being asexual and getting into polyamorous relationships. What structure is more beneficial and why?
Well, there's no one structure that everyone in the community is using. It's it's all over the map. There are asexual people who are extremely polyamorous and think about their industry that way. There are other asexual people who are entirely monogamous. So it's difficult to say. One of the big trends, though, that I've seen is that a lot of people question for themselves, in terms of how they structure their relationships, the distinction between relationships that are sexual and relationships that aren't. So the idea that you have friends who are in one category and partners who are in another category, or a partner who's in another category, is something that a lot of people kind of trace back to the idea that you're having sex with some people and not having sex with other people. And that's an idea that a lot of people question and take issue with. And so people will think about, all right, rather than saying that I have a partner and friends, or I have a couple of partners and friends, I'm just going to say that I have relationships. And I'm going to, in some way, think about all my relationships as involving the same things, even if some of them are extremely casual and some of them, have an intense level of commitment.
I'd like to take this into a slightly different direction because we are running out of time, and I've got so many more questions I want to ask you. A personal question for you. Have you ever tried to masturbate, or have you ever had an orgasm? And
yeah.
So you've tried that? Oh,
yes.
Was it pleasurable at all for you?
Yes, it was. And I know that can seem really contradictory to I guess, to the idea of asexuality. But two important things to realize, to think about, at least the way that I think about that. First of all, whether or not I masturbate doesn't really have an impact on my life. Whether or not I form sexual relationships does. So there are some people in the asexual community who masturbate. There's some people in the asexual community who don't. But we're basically stuck thinking about the same things. We have the same kind of issues to struggle with, and we have the same conversations about them, and so we have the same identity that we use to communicate and figure them out. And the way that if you like having sex with someone who's female, you won't necessarily like having sex with someone who's male. If you like masturbating, you won't necessarily like having sex with a partner. Is the way that I've experienced it, and that a lot of other asexual people have experienced it.
But the pleasure that you feel from, say, an orgasm, does that at all encourage you to masturbate more frequently?
A little bit, but not really.
Okay. Have you ever had a wet dream?
Not in my memory.
Okay. And I'd like to touch on, what does an asexual feel during sex? Because I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, there are some people who are asexual, may not even realize that they're asexual, who will engage into relationships and go through this sexual act, sexual motions, but not necessarily, well, you know what, I don't even know what it is they would feel. So what would an asexual person feel during the act of sex?
Well, and I get the sense that this is true of sexual people, too. It depends on why they're having sex. If they're having sex as a way to express intimacy with someone and show they love someone, even if that's not something that they're wired to feel aroused about, it could still be a powerful experience if it's communicating that emotion. If they're having sex because they feel like they've been pressured into it, then it will probably be an awful experience. The same way if a sexual person was having sex because they felt that they were pressured into it.
So an asexual person who's having sex will not feel sexual pleasure, but they might feel pleasure in expressing an emotion? They
might feel pleasure in another way. I know personally when I haven't had, as I said, I haven't had sex. When I was making out with people, when I've made out with people, it's not sexually pleasurable, but it's pleasurable because if I'm making out with them, I'm usually also hugging them, and I like hugging people.
Do you find that hugging in itself is a form of sexuality?
Not for me. I think for some people it can be related to sexuality.
Okay. And why don't we stop with this line of questioning, and we'll get back to it if we have time.
Okay.
I want you to tell me about your website. What's your website called? What kind of a resources it is? What people can find there? Give me everything you can about your website and why you started it up.
The website is located at asexuality.org. It's called the Asexual Visibility and Education Network, or aven. And right now it's the world's largest community of asexual people. It's where a lot of this stuff has been happening for the first time and getting talked about for the first time. And we have a variety of resources on asexuality. We have lists. We have what are called facts, frequently asked questions, kind of just breaking down what are the common experiences that asexual people feel in some depth. We also have a lot of articles on everything from what it's like to come out to sort of the growth of the asexual community. There's one on there called Confessions of an Asexual Slut that are different essays written on what it's like to be asexual by members of the community. And then there's the community itself. It's in 7 different languages. The English language community is the largest by far. We've got almost 7,000 members right now, actively discussing things every day. There's also a wiki, there's a store you can go to buy asexual t-shirts. I think they even have an asexual thong on there now. The entire website is maintained by a team of volunteers. We have no budget other than about $7 a month that I pay for internet hosting. So there's a couple of dozen volunteers all around the world that maintain the different online forums, maintain the website, generate content for it, do outreach and visibility work. We give workshops. We get in touch with different community centers and places that are talking about sexuality, encourage them to talk about asexuality. And we also do work like this, doing interviews with the press. Our mission is really twofold. The core of our mission is to increase open, honest dialogue about asexuality. And so the 2 ways that we do that are by building a community that's a safe space for anyone who's asexual or sexual or questioning to come and talk about these issues. And the other thing we do is we actively reach out to the rest of the world and try to increase the level of discussion about asexuality, and try to help inform people who are interested in it so they can talk about it in more depth.
Next question, and I'm sure this is on the mind of a lot of audience members right now. Is asexuality normal?
Is it normal? Who cares?
You heard that? I'm applauding. That was a wonderful.
Statistically, I don't know. Like I said, we think initial scientific estimates put us at 1% of the population. Just based on going around and talking to people, and the amount of times that I will get up in front of a crowd and give a speech and have someone walk up to me afterward and say, you know what, I really resounded, I really related to that. I think that this could be a way for me to talk about myself. There are a lot of us out there, and I guess if you're going to gauge normality by how similar our experience is to that of sexual people, in a lot of ways it's really, really similar. Because we have the same needs in relationships, and a lot of the ways that we think about relationships and a lot of the things that we experience in relationships are very, very similar. But I also think that we have a unique perspective, and we're thinking things about sexuality that no one's ever thought before, and exploring ways of living our lives that I've never seen anyone else explore before. And that's very new, and it's very exciting.
Was there been any experience during your activism, doing interviews and so on, was there anything that you weren't expecting that turned out to be a very challenging or negative experience?
Not really. The nice thing about, one of the interesting things about being asexual, I've found, is that people are really, really curious about it. So I've had discussions, as soon as I started coming out to people, when I was in college, I just started having these long, intense discussions about asexuality all the time with tons of different people. And when you've had that discussion a certain number of times, you just know it back to front. And so I rarely find that I'll get things that completely surprise me. Though I've had some tough interviews. I was just on The View, which is this show on ABC. That was kind of intense, but for the most part, it's I feel like we in the asexual community have talked about this stuff a lot more than other people have. So the questions that other people are asking are inevitably questions that we've already asked ourselves in some way.
Got a couple of other questions for you here. If a person is asexual and doesn't have any sexual desire, when it comes to becoming a parent, although this makes the children that much more safe, maybe more foster parents should be asexual so that children don't end up being the abuse of any sexual desires there that shouldn't be. There's also the argument that a parent who can't understand sexual desire might not be able to guide their children when their children are starting to go through sexual desire. What do you think about all that?
I think that any child's sexuality is going to be different enough from that of their parents that I'm not going to be that much better or that much worse off. I have a strong understanding of sexuality. As I said, because it was something that I grew up having no internal perspective to understand, I've kind of had to spend a lot of time come to terms with it and gaining an intellectual understanding of it so that I could interact with it in the world. So I'm not completely without context to understand the sexuality of other people. And I think it would be a challenge, but no more of a challenge than having a child grow up in a very different time. Having a child grow up in a time where sexuality means a very different thing than it meant when you were a kid.
If a person is unable to feel sexual desires, can they recognize when someone else is flirting with them or making advances?
Oh, yeah. Well, so you wouldn't depends on how heads up they are, but I definitely can. And when I was young and naive, I used to shy away from that. But now I just flirt right back and I hit on people because I've realized that if someone hits on me, they may in their mind think it's about sexuality, but it's always about more than sexuality. They're interested in me. They're interested in engaging me as a person, and I can take that in a direction that's not sexuality that both of us are going to find enjoyable.
Do you think that people are more likely to be attracted to you because you're asexual, because you don't give off any sort of sexual vibe?
I have no idea. I think of myself as a reasonably attractive person. But I don't have a basis of comparison.
And one last question. If someone once felt sexual feelings and due to a bad experience has shut off all of their emotions, sexual emotions, would that qualify them as asexual?
Well, if I guess alluded to this earlier. If someone comes to the website and identifies as asexual, they're asexual. We don't go through and label people. We don't say you're really asexual and you're not. So if they came to the website and they identified with what we were talking about and they decided to start calling themselves asexual, then yeah, so we would acknowledge them as asexual.
So it's not something they're born with necessarily.
most asexual people have been asexual for their entire lives, don't have a traumatic experience associated with sexuality, and haven't changed. You know, we have people in their 60s, their 70s, and down to their teens. There's a huge age range. So I would say that the majority of asexual people have been born this way, but as I said, there's no hard scientific data. That person, though, that you were talking about, someone who's emotionally closed off, and that's why they're avoiding sexuality, if that person comes to the community and identifies as asexual, we won't tell them, you know, oh no, you're just emotionally closed off, you really need to be exploring sex. We will challenge them. As I've been alluding to, asexual people aren't emotionally closed off. If you have issues that are preventing you from forming a relationship as a sexual person, those issues will prevent you from forming a relationship as an asexual person. And our community is a place that challenges people to do that, that challenges people to explore the ways that they're connecting with people.
One last question before we sign off. If you could go back in time and give your younger self some advice, what advice would that be?
I'd be afraid to do that because I've been so lucky so far in having this community come together. But I guess it would be, don't take sexuality too seriously. Sexuality, I think when I was younger, I got really caught up in being asexual because I felt like sexuality was this big deal, and it's not this big deal. The liberating thing for me about being asexual has been realizing that for some people sex matters a lot. For me, it doesn't have to matter at all.
David, it's been absolutely wonderful having you here on Frank Talks.
Okay.
And we certainly hope that you'll be tuning in and that we invite you back to come and be interviewed in the future.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Can you give us your contact information one more time for our audience?
The website is www.asexuality.org. If anyone wants to send me an email, they can email me at webmaster@asexuality.org.
You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by Everything Out of Her Mouth is a Test, a man's guide to the emotional needs of women. Ladies, does your man squash your inner vixen? When you ask him to repeat what you have just said to him, does he look at you like a deer caught in the headlights? Does he think that leaving the game on while you talk to him is a good idea? Is his favorite phrase, "Yes, dear, you are absolutely right"? Does wife or girlfriend mean boring and dull to him? Ladies, don't you wish that he knows what you mean when you ask him if you look fat? Then you need to buy him the book, Everything Out of Her Mouth is a Test, a man's guide to the emotional needs of women. On sale now at franktalks.com.
If you need help with your relationships, my buddy Frank, he's got some tips. Just go to franktalks.com. His advice is better than your mom's. He knows what you're going through, Frank has been there too. So log on to franktalks.com. franktalks.com.
Need help with love, sex, dating, or relationship issues? Help from Frank Kermit, the best-selling author and Canada's most international relationship coach, is only a click away at franktalks.com. What do you do when you feel like a fool? When your heart has been broken again? Pick up the phone phone or get onto Skype and talk on a private session. Yeah, get a little help from Frank Talks. Whoa, whoa, get by with a little help from Frank Talks. You gotta try a little help from Frank Talks. What do you do when your love goes away? Try coaching one-on-one. How do I sign up to turn things around? Just sign up at franktalks.com. Yeah, get by with help from Frank Talks. I get by with little help from Frank Talks. Time to try a little help from Frank Talks. Does it cost a lot of money? It's the best rate going around. Could it cost a lot of money? Oh, it's worth every cent that you will put down. Yeah, Frank Talks. Oh, you got to go to get your help from franktalks.com. Yeah, yeah. Would you believe that Frank gets results? Yes, we're certain. Just read the reviews. Frank knows his stuff, and Frank's got real goods. Good love can soon come to you.